All right, let's jump right in. The Analects and the Abacus. You've got ancient ethics on one hand and modern economics on the other. Now, most of us would say those two things are worlds apart, right? But for one guy, a man they call the father of Japanese capitalism, Shibusawa Eiichi, they were basically two sides of the same coin. And getting a handle on that idea, well, that's how we're going to unlock his incredible and for a long time, almost completely forgotten story.
So here's the big mystery we're going to dig into. This man had a massive, colossal impact on Japan's economy. I mean, he literally built the foundations of modern Japanese business. And yet, until just recently, he was pretty much a historical footnote. You gotta ask yourself, how is that even possible?
And just to give you a sense of the sheer scale of what he did, look at this number, 480. That's how many companies he helped get off the ground. And we're not talking about small shops. We're talking about banks, railways, hotels, breweries, many of which are still around today. The scope of his influence is just staggering. And yet, despite all that, he was the forgotten father. I mean, think about this. As recently as maybe 15 years ago, you could go to a business seminar in Japan, drop his name, and most people would just go, Shibusawa? Who's that? It's just an unbelievable historical blind spot. So the key to understanding this guy and why he's being rediscovered now, it all comes down to this one powerful idea. He was convinced that the moral teachings of Confucius, the Analects, and the practical world of business, the Abacus, that they weren't in conflict at all. In fact, he argued they were totally essential to each other. So how in the world did he get to this pretty radical philosophy? Well, his journey didn't start in some fancy boardroom. Nope. It started with a teenage farmer who was absolutely burning with a sense of injustice. This was the moment that changed everything for him. So as a teenager, he comes from a pretty well-off farming family. He goes to a local official's office for his dad, and this official, he just treats him with total contempt, demanding money, sneering at him. Shibusawa was just so humiliated. And in that moment, he realized the problem wasn't just one arrogant guy. It was the whole rotten political system. And that one moment of injustice, it sparked his first great ambition. In Japanese, they have a word for this, Kokorozashi. He decided right then and there that he had to become a samurai, get into the ruling class, and fix the country from the inside out. For him, politics seemed like the only noble way to build a strong, fair Japan. Now, what's really fascinating here is that this wasn't just about personal ambition, It was all rooted in the Confucian classics that he'd been studying since he was a kid. And the core teaching there is pretty simple. First, you work on yourself. Then you can bring peace and order to others. So for him, getting into politics wasn't a career choice, it was a moral duty. But the road to fulfilling that duty, it was anything but a straight line. In fact, his early career was just a total whirlwind of contradictions and chaos that basically threw all his plans right out the window. Just get a load of this timeline. One minute, he's an anti-government activist, plotting to overthrow the whole system. The next year, he's working for the very government he wanted to topple. Then, he gets shipped off to Europe, sees industrial capitalism with his own eyes, and it blows his mind. He comes back, the old government is gone, and bam, he lands a top job in the brand new one. It was just a dizzying, totally unpredictable ride. Looking back on it, he talked about how powerless he felt. Even with all his studying and his strong will, he felt like he was just being tossed around by these massive waves of history. He called himself a man of adversity, basically saying he couldn't even steer his own ship. But here's the twist. It was inside that new government, right at the peak of his political career, that Shibusawa hit his biggest wall. A frustration so big, it would lead him to make the decision that would define the rest of his life. Okay, to really get why he made this move, you have to understand the culture back then. In Meiji Japan, there was this really strict social ladder for jobs. At the very top, you had government. That was seen as noble, a moral calling, something for the old samurai to do. And at the bottom, you had business. It was seen as lowly, greedy, just a selfish chase for profit. But Shibusawa had seen Europe's industrial power. He just knew that Japan's future depended on having a strong private economy. The problem? His colleagues in the Ministry of Finance, all these former samurai, they just didn't get it. They looked down their noses at business. So here he is, trying to build a modern economy with a team that thinks the whole subject is beneath them. He must have felt totally alone.
And then he has this breakthrough moment, and it comes from a really random place. He's with a friend who's talking about a painting, and this friend casually says something like, I follow the Analects, and you follow the Abacus. And that phrase, the Analects and the Abacus, it just clicked. A total light bulb moment. He saw his whole philosophy summed up in that one little comment.
So what does he do? In 1873, at just 33 years old, Shibusawa does the unthinkable. He quits his high-status government job to become a businessman. His colleagues were absolutely horrified. They called him a disgrace, said he was blinded by money. But his reply was so powerful. He basically said, no, you don't get it. I will live my life by the Analects, but I'm going to do it through business. He wasn't giving up his morals. He was taking them into a totally new arena. So you might look at this and think it's a story of failure, right? He set out to be a politician and wasn't. But that's not it at all. And to really understand why, we need to unpack the difference between an aspiration and a true calling. And we can do that by looking at Confucius's life in a really surprising way. Okay, check this out. It's a really cool way to look at these famous milestones from Confucius's life. We usually read them as a list of achievements, but what if you read them from the back? What if you read them as what he lacked before that age? So when it says at 30 he stood firm, it implies he was wobbly before that. At 40, he had no doubts, which means he was full of doubt at 39. And the big one? He only knew the will of heaven, his true calling, at 50. That means even the great Confucius was wrestling with his purpose until he was basically middle-aged. It's a journey, a struggle for everyone. And that brings us to this crucial difference. You've got Kokorozashi, the aspiration. That's that feeling you have when you're young, full of potential, thinking, I can do anything, I'm going to change the world. Then you have Tenmei, the calling. That's different. That comes from getting knocked around a bit. It comes from experience, from knowing what you're good at, and just as importantly, what you're not so good at. It's about finding that sweet spot where you can make your best contribution. And this is the perfect way to look at Shibusawa's life. He didn't fail. He didn't abandon his dream. Instead, through all that chaos and all that frustration, he found his true calling, his Tenmei. He realized he wasn't meant to be a politician. His unique gift was to build that strong Japan he always dreamed of, just not from inside the government, but from the outside, through ethical business. And he lived this calling right to the very end. He literally kept an open door policy at his house. Anyone could show up, no introduction needed, because he was always looking for new talent, new ideas that could help Japan. In a funny way, he ended up becoming the ultimate statesman. He just did it from the private sector, a true statesman of the people. And his whole philosophy is just perfectly summed up in this famous line he had for young people. He said, look, we have prepared the feast. Whether you eat or not, that depends on you. Young people, you need to take up the chopsticks yourselves. He's saying his generation did the heavy lifting, they set the table. But they're not going to spoon feed you. It's on you to have the drive, the hunger, to pick up your own chopsticks and get to work. So that leaves us with one final thought to chew on. Shibusawa's genius was connecting two things that everyone else saw as complete opposites: ancient ethics and modern business. And it really makes you wonder, what are the opposites we're dealing with today? What are the things that we think can't possibly go together, like maybe technology and humanity or profit and true purpose, that we actually need to combine to build a better future?